in a stunning diplomatic development that signals a dramatic pivot in the West's approach to the war in Ukraine. German opposition leader Friedrich Merz announced that a broad consensus has been reached between Kyiv, key European capitals, and the Trump administrations on a unified framework for negotiations ahead of a landmark summit in Alaska between President Donald Trump and the Russian president. This assertion, made following a series of intensive virtual meetings that include President Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and other European leaders, suggests that the catastrophic military realities on the ground, most notably the recent encirclement of a large Ukrainian force in the Donbass, have forced a profound and urgent strategic reassessment. The agreement, as described by Merz, is not a final peace deal, but rather a consolidated set of principles and objectives designed to present a united front before President Trump sits down for talks. It represents a desperate 11th hour efforts to reshape the agenda of the Alaska meeting and prevent a settlement dictated solely by Moscow's military gains and Washington's eagerness to end the costly conflict. Speaking from Berlin, with President Zelensky at his side, Merz, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, projected a sense of sober unity, stating that the transatlantic partners were very much in agreement on the path forward. He emphasized that any diplomatic process must begin with a ceasefire and that fundamental European and Ukrainian security interests must be protected. The core of this new unified position, according to officials briefed on the discussions, revolved around several key points. A primary point is the absolute insistence that Ukraine must have a seat at the table in any substantive negotiations about its future. This directly counters fear in Kyiv and European capitals that President Trump might broker a bilateral deal with Russia over their heads. Another point in the agreement calls for an immediate and durable cessation of hostilities as a precondition for political talks. The framework also reportedly outlines a structure for robust long-term security guarantees for Ukraine, a critical demand from Kyiv to prevent future Russian aggression. The most sensitive and difficult aspect, the question of territory, was also addressed. While publicly rejecting any forced land swap, the consensus acknowledged that the current front line will inevitably form the basis for initial talks, a painful concession to the military reality. The driving force behind this sudden alignment is the rapidly deteriorating situation on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine. The successful Russian pincer movement that trapped many thousands of Ukrainian soldiers near Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka has shattered any remaining illusions in Kyiv's and Western capital about the possibility of a near-term military victory. The potential for a complete collapse of the Donbass front has lent a desperate urgency to the search for a diplomatic off-ramp. Intelligence assessment provided to the White House by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe are understood to have painted a grim picture of Ukraine's dwindling military capacity, reinforcing the view within the Trump administration that the war is unwinnable in its current form and that continued massive support is unsustainable. This stark military appraisal has given President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio the leverage to push both Ukraine and reluctant European allies toward the negotiating table. President Trump's approach to the conflict has been consistent with his American First doctrine, viewing the war as a European problem that is draining American resources. He has publicly stated his desire to fix the war and has been openly critical of the cost of supporting Ukraine. The upcoming Alaska summit is seen as the centerpiece of his strategy to secure a major foreign policy achievement by brokering a deal to end the fighting. His administration has signaled a significant departure from the previous policy of unequivocal support for Ukraine's goal of liberating all its territory. Instead, the focus has shifted to achieving a pragmatic, if imperfect, peace. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent has been conducting a thorough review of financial aid to Kyiv, a move widely interpreted as a signal that the blank check of the past is gone. Simultaneously, Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth has been in talks with his European counterparts, pressing them to take on a greater share of the financial and military burden for their own continent's security. The Trump administration's messaging has been clear. The United States is willing to act as a mediator, but it will not be drawn into an endless war. For European leaders, The prospect of the Alaska summit initially caused widespread anxiety. There was a palpable fear that President Trump, in his eagerness for a deal, might make concessions to Russia at the expense of Ukrainian sovereignty and broader European security. Nations on NATO's eastern flank were particularly alarmed by the idea of a bilateral U.S.-Russia agreement that could weaken the security architecture of the region. However, the coordinated diplomatic effort spearheaded by Germany's Merch and French President Emmanuel Macron appears to have successfully impressed upon President Trump the importance of a unified Western stance. Following the virtual meeting, President Macron confirmed that Trump was very clear that he wants to achieve a ceasefire and agreed that Ukraine must be involved in any talks on territories. This reassurance, while welcome, has not entirely dispelled European concern. The continent's leaders are acutely aware that President Trump's transactional approach and personal rapport with the Russian leader could still lead to unpredictable outcomes in Alaska. The shift in Kyiv's position has been the most dramatic. For years, President Zelensky has maintained that no negotiations were possible until Russia withdraw all its troops from Ukrainian territory. The recent military setback, however, have made that position untenable. Facing the potential annihilation of a huge portion of his army, Zelensky has been forced to accept the harsh reality that a negotiated settlement, however painful, may be the only way to preserve the Ukrainian state. His presence in Berlin alongside Merch was a powerful symbol of this reluctant pivot. While still insisting that Ukraine would never voluntarily give up its land, his agreement to a framework that accepts the current battle lines as a starting point for talks marks a fundamental change. This shift has not been without controversy inside Ukraine, where a significant portion of the military and the public remain fiercely opposed to any territorial concessions. The decision to enter talks under such duress is a massive political gamble for Zelensky, one born of sheer necessity. The agreement announced by Merch is therefore a complex and fragile construct. It is a coalition of necessity binding together parties with different long-term interests who are united by the immediate crisis. For Ukraine, it is about survival. For Europe, it is about managing a dangerous conflict on its border and maintaining some semblance of control over the diplomatic process. For the Trump administration, it is about fulfilling a campaign promise to end an endless war and demonstrating a new model of American foreign policy. The framework for talks reportedly include not just a ceasefire and territorial discussion, but also complex issues such as the future of sanctions on Russia, the demilitarizations of certain areas, and the establishment of a new security architecture for Eastern Europe that address Russia's stated concerns without compromising the sovereignty of its neighbor. The choice of Alaska for the summit is itself symbolic, a location geographically situated between the two powers and a land once owned by Russia. It signals a departure from the traditional European venues for such high-stakes diplomacy. It reinforces the American-led nature of the initiative. The pre-summit maneuvering has been intense, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio engaging in constant shuttle diplomacy and back-channel communication to build the consensus announced by Merch. His efforts have been supported by intelligence from Director Garbert's office, which has been crucial in aligning the perspective of the various allied governments on the sovereignty of the situation. Other members of the Trump cabinet, including those with primarily domestic portfolios like Secretary of the Interior Douglas Burgum and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, have publicly supported the president's focus on ending foreign entanglement to better address issues at home, reinforcing the political mandate for the Alaska Initiative. As President Trump prepares to travel to Alaska, the world watched with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The agreement outlined by Friedrich Merch provide a glimmer of a coordinated Western strategy, a potential pathway out of a brutal and devastating conflict. However, the fundamental disagreement between the parties remains vast. Russia enters the talk from a position of military strength unlikely to relinquish its hard-won gains easily. Ukraine is negotiating under the shadow of military defeat with limited leverage. Europe remains anxious, caught between its commitment to Ukraine and its reliance on American leadership, and President Donald Trump, the ultimate deal-maker, hold the most powerful cards. The outcome of the Alaska summit will depend on his ability to navigate these complex dynamics and forge a peace that, while perhaps not just may be the only one currently attainable. The agreement to talk is a first step, but the path to a lasting settlement is still fraught with peril. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to World Global Conflict, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first ones on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you are a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.